Hello, everyone. Welcome to CXO Spice. CXO Spice is a platform for thought leaders to share their point of view on innovation and explain how to make it happen in real world. I'm your host, Helen Yu. Today's topic is transforming cybersecurity with exposure management. Our special guest today is Karl Triebes, Chief Product Officer of Ivanti. Hello, Carl. Welcome to CXO Spice.
Hi, Helen. Hey, great to be here. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah, congrats on the recent appointment of CPO at Ivanti. So I'd love to hear more about your tech journey and your new role at Ivanti.
Sure. So at Ivanti, I'm responsible for the technology, so the engineering, as well as the product and product management side, as well as the SaaS operations side. So basically, I got to build it. I got to make sure the customers like it, and I have to make sure it operates well, in that context, right? And I have a long history with, cloud operations and this type of technology. So I'm real excited to be here, helping Ivanti, kind of get to that next level.
Well, great to have you here, Carl. And that's a very big role. That also marks a major milestone for Ivanti. Let's dive into our main topic today. I came across Ivanti's State of Cybersecurity report lately. It highlights a shift towards exposure management. Can you explain what exposure management is and how it really differs from the traditional vulnerability management practices?
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is it's that next step in the evolution of how we tie the business side, the business risks with the technical slash product slash security risks within an organization and present a holistic view of all that. It's similar to if you look along, throughout time. If you look at things like when firewalls first started showing up, it was protecting your network access, your assets, excuse me. And then later that turned out not to be good enough. There was problems with the application side. So you saw application security, you saw the rise of CASB and other things that tried to create a different perimeter. And what we're doing with exposure management is we're changing that security perimeter to include, again, all the business pieces, right? It's not just about managing the assets. It's about managing the entire attack surface associated with everything you try to do on your, within your digital infrastructure. And this infrastructure can be on premise, it can be in the cloud, it can be IoT, it can be anywhere, endpoints, you name it. It's the way to get your hands around that and make it relatable and easy to understand as compared to a bunch of, very technical jargon things you hear in security.
I'm very glad that you tie that to business risk. That's very insightful. So it's clear that we need a more holistic approach to mitigating risk. Speaking of which, the report also touches on a change in how organizations view their, attack surface, as you mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
Can you elaborate that on this shift and its impact on modern security strategies?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about why that attack surface has changed, and that is, the role of IT is distinctly different, or has been distinctly different than the role of security. IT is kind of the go team, right? They're in there trying to enable the business, helping enable their engineers, their salespeople. They're the ones that are responsible for that infrastructure and these applications and running and managing all this. They take the tickets, everything. Whereas security is involved in looking at risks to the organization, problems. Hey, are these, for CVEs coming in, that are associated with tech, with products they're using. There's attacks, there's phishing, there's all sorts of things that they have to be aware of. But unfortunately, because these teams tend to speak different languages and do have different roles, they tend to be siloed. And that's been the challenge, is being able to talk, have these two teams work together and provide essentially that unified picture of the threats to the business. And that's really, when we talk about exposure management, it's being able to tie things to that risk, right? Being able to look at things like, I go back holistically. So instead of just looking at things like, hey, I need to update these versions of Linux that I'm running on my servers, or I have these CVEs, or I need to update antivirus, or I'm keeping up my endpoints up to date. It's looking for things like shadow IT, third-party risks. Are there misconfigurations within my infrastructure? Software vulnerabilities that I need to be aware of that may not show up with a high CVSS score, but in combination create problems. So they look at that bigger picture. Things like weak credentials. All the things that you would that not necessarily the IT group would be aware of, but are risks to the business, and you need to pull these things through and then present these in a way that both sides can understand. And that's really what the intention of exposure management is to do that, right? So instead of being kind of this static perimeter based view to we move more that dynamic of all entry, or I should say that dynamic assessment of all different types of access points, right? So, or access parts, ways to get into your organization. So and then it continuously monitors that and then presents that updated picture. And so you can look at your risk on an ongoing basis and make decisions whether that suits your business requirements or not, because now you have a way to kind of measure it against the risks of the business. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense to me. With the growing demand of AI, right? There's not only shadow IT, there's shadow AI as well. So with that shift in mind, let's talk a little bit more about the visibility into cybersecurity risk. Ivanti emphasizes the importance of having a contextual view of cybersecurity risk. How do you help organizations gain better visibility into these risks, align IT security with overall risk tolerance?
Yeah, as I was mentioning, we connect these or I should say the traditional kind of what you'd say like cyber asset attack surface management, or CASM, capabilities with this ability to create this risk score based upon these other conditions that I was talking about, based on the full posture of the network. So you go out, you discover all the assets, you assess those, but then you're able to apply a risk based upon these different assets, and then correlate that to an actual, to the risk that it presents to the business. And the challenge I would say that the teams have is, how do you make that, how do you assess your risk posture, and how do you make that tangible to, say, your board, who's deeply concerned about these things? You look at these different exploits that have happened in the past that have had a massive impact on the business. You look at like the MGM exploit, you look at SolarWinds, you just look at these other companies that have had these issues, and that have had a huge impact to their business. The other aspect of, or the other challenge that organizations have is that they all need to adopt or get cybersecurity insurance, right? They need to be able to be protected against attacks. Well, how do they communicate their risk, or how do they communicate their posture effectively in order to manage that? And this helps present a way to do that, because there's really no standards out there right now. You hear about, for example, when they talk about cybersecurity, insurance, they talk about, oh, you need to support the dirty dozen. And it's things like having a web application firewall and antivirus protections and other mechanisms, to deal with anti-phishing and all that. But it doesn't really go to a score that says, all right, if I do all these things, at what level at what level do I need to do these things? And how do these relate to that ongoing the attack surface that I have? The other thing that complicates these environments is that companies that have been around for a while have a continuum of different assets that come from different vintages. You may have old databases laying around. You may be, using older edge clients. You may be like a manufacturing business that's still using like old SCADA protocols, or utilities and things like that. They're all very different. And so the problem is, how do you relate all these different conditions, environments, and all that, and roll that back up to that kind of a central view of, all right, here's my risk score, here's how I understand it, and now as I make adjustments, is that score going up or down? How does that, how much am I having to invest in my cybersecurity business, and how much am I able to, or I should say, my cybersecurity protections, and how much more investment do I need to make in order to achieve the results that I want? Things like that, right? Because again, you can invest all of your profits into security, but is it doing anything for you? Is it actually moving the needle? Is it actually protecting you, right? It's all about, how do I invest? It's like buying, I relate it to like, it's like buying a insurance policy, right? You're only willing to spend so much for a perceived level of risk. Well, here we're trying to make it tangible.
Yeah, you raise a really, important point, Karl, right? How do I invest and where do I invest? And then how do I measure the return of my investment when it comes to cybersecurity is extremely challenging, as you mentioned. As cybersecurity becomes a bigger priority at the executive and board level, I'm curious about how Ivanti bridges that gap between cybersecurity teams and leadership. How does Ivanti help organizations align their risk priorities across these teams?
Yeah. So the way Ivanti, bridges this gap between cybersecurity teams and executive leadership is by offering solutions, that facilitate, clear communication and alignment. So this includes things you would expect, like dashboards and reporting tools that translate these technical risk metrics, which tend to be very, I don't want to say obtuse, but tend to be very focused on the jargon of cybersecurity folks. But, how many execs really understand what it means to have a CVSS of 4 versus a CVSS of 9? Or, what does an RCE actually mean, right? So it needs to be turned into these relevant business insights, right? And so that'll help the executives understand. And then based on that, then they can prioritize the cybersecurity risk, and then they can provide the prioritization of where things, the investments and how those are going to be invested. Now, what we also include is advanced analytics, that translate the complex technical data, like I said, into these easily understandable insights. And that makes it easier for executive leadership to really grasp the significance of the cybersecurity threats, right? And so it's really that key, is that those insights, being able to provide that visibility and understand what that really means, right? And so that's a key thing. Now, the other aspect of this is getting alignment with IT, between these two teams, security and IT. And again, like I mentioned, the IT and security functions have really been separated. In fact, that they said it's like within our report, we found that 55% of organizations report that IT and security data is siloed in their organization. So there is a big separation. And they even said that on average, it's going to take years to try to separate this out if they do it, on their own, kind of, in their own way, right? And of course, this creates, problems with weakened security postures and slow response times, and that lack of collaboration, just keeps fueling that. And so that's the other aspect, is breaking down those silos so that IT workflows now can converge with these security requirements and what needs to be enforced, and they have a better understanding of the priorities of each one of each other's teams. And with that, then they can better make decisions for the overall business and how things need to be prioritized.
Yeah, 55% is a very large percentage, more than half, right? And then I read your report. It says it would take 6 years for the two teams to get fully aligned. That's just mind-blowing. So that alignment is so critical. Speaking of alignment, how do Ivanti's solution bring IT and security teams together? What tools or strategies does Ivanti offer to improve collaboration and overall cybersecurity posture?
Yeah, so again, it gives a unified view. Our tools give a unified view of the security risks, because again, IT is much more focused on kind of what they perceive as the business, and that is, enablement, meaning enablement of the various functions and the tools for those various functions, and that's typically where they align. And then they will implement policies, typically like on the networking side, like firewall policies or app firewall policies and things like that. But they don't necessarily have the visibility across that entire landscape to understand, okay, well, like I said, what's going on with shadow IT? What are these third-party risks? They don't manage the third parties, but these third parties have access, and they may be in some cases, holding customer data. That's tier 1 data that you have to manage. Or it's easy to have misconfigurations within the environment they may not be aware of. Software vulnerabilities that they may not be aware of, but need to be patched and things like that. So there needs to be that unified view of the security risks. And once you have that, then you can have better visibility across the departments. With that unified view, it comes that empathy, right? Is the way I like to think about it, is that, okay, security does better understand what's going on, with IT and what their challenges are. And then the same thing on the IT side. And with that, then they can better align, and prioritize. It's all about priorities, right? Because it's funny, our report also exposed that, security groups tend to have I don't want to say disdainful view, but they have a view, like, for example, on they like 46% of security professionals said, IT lacks kind of the necessary urgency that they expect, and that's part again because of these silos. And it also says that from the report, said 40% of security professionals also say IT doesn't understand an organization's risk tolerance. Again, they're kind of dealing with the parametrics or kind of the low level details of managing something, but they don't necessarily see the big picture. And unfortunately, the infosec teams or the security teams have to see the big picture because security attacks or exploits come from all different angles. They're not just coming in from some kiddie script or hacker in a basement somewhere. These can be very persistent nation state, very sophisticated attacks these days. There's ransomware. There's a lot of money with getting into organizations' infrastructure and taking their data.
Yeah, I echo what you just said there. I've been working with quite a few companies that facing those challenges, right? The internal alignment actually could really take a toll sometimes, right? And just very challenging. But you actually mentioned this. Let's talk a little bit about risk tolerance, the framework. Why is it so critical for companies to follow these frameworks, and what could happen if they don't?
Yeah, so there's 5 points to think about with IT security and risk tolerance. One, the framework ensures alignment of security measures with risk appetite and business objectives. So that's kind of key. That's kind of number one. The second one would be prevents gaps in security coverage and misallocation of resources. Because of that holistic view, it's much easier now to see these holes in your system. It's really hard just based on this. Like I said, I go back to CVEs. When you look at those, you don't really know exactly how these are going to affect you. Often a score, you could come in with a high CVSS score and it actually doesn't affect your system at all. Whereas sometimes a low one can have a major impact. And so these are just a gap. This is just one example of a gap that you can run into. And again, because we run a very complex infrastructure, both on-prem and cloud, and provide these to our customers, we actually use this model because it helps us better make sure that these gaps are closed, and that we're really focused on the key threats versus low grade threats, right? That we're putting our key resources on that. So that was the second point. The third point is doing this just reduces vulnerability to cyber threats. The key is that you want to try to lock down your systems as much as you can, but you don't want to do it to the extent that it affects your business operation. Meaning that you don't want to be. It shouldn't come at the expense of your business or your growth. You should be able to do this in a way that makes sense and it's sensible for the needs of the business. And so, but you want to reduce that cybersecurity area, right? And that goes back to the point about the business objectives. The other component about this framework is you don't want to have a false sense of security. Putting your head in the sand and hoping is not a strategy. You really want to have a rational view of where your threat surface and the vulnerabilities associated with that threat surface and the measures that you're taking to close those gaps. And what the reality of that is. There's always going to be risk. Nobody can guarantee 100% there isn't going to be something. But what we can do is ensure that you have the best security and better than ever, hopefully better than anyone or most others or anyone else, and that any attackers are going to give up and move on to somewhere, maybe a richer target, right? That's what you got to think about, right? So, and then finally, within the risk tolerance framework is that it'll mitigate, potential financial and reputational damage. You just think about, like with SolarWinds, you just look at what they suffered through reputationally because of what happened there. And I'm not picking on SolarWinds. There's, many other companies target others, but look at just the Office of Personnel Management, for the U.S. government, they had a major, hack, with data. There's just many examples of this, but in all cases, it has hurt the reputation of these companies, and people don't trust, their data out there. And so they need to come back and really present a way that gives confidence, to their users, to their customers, that they have a handle on these things. And so you really want to avoid that in the first place, right? That's the best thing, right? The second thing is to respond quickly, and the third thing is to quickly close any gaps, and after an attack and forensically determine the damage, right? But really, ideally, let's stop it in the first place.
Mm-hmm. That being said, Carl, having that exposure is so critical, right? It becomes a strategic investment when we talk about exposure management with cybersecurity. By the way, I've spoken with a few CTOs lately about another concern, tech debt compromising security. So how is Ivanti addressing this, and especially when dealing with legacy systems, complex infrastructures? You actually alluded a little bit earlier.
Yeah, yeah. In technical debt, I've never liked using that word, but I guess it describes the situation. It does it kind of in a negative way. And the way I look at it is, organizations have invested, in infrastructure over the past that's difficult to keep up to date. It's expensive to move these things along, and it's not always easy to do. In fact, within our report, there's like about 1/3 of the organizations report it as a significant issue.
Mm.
And as companies, organizations have been around for a while, they're going to, like I mentioned earlier, they're going to have different vintages of products or infrastructure. They may have started out on premise. They may be moving into the cloud. They may have moved some of their applications into the cloud. They maybe now be consuming SaaS applications. They may now have, instead of like 30 years ago, they may not have had mobile devices. Now they have mobile devices accessing us. The world has become very, API, I don't want to say API friendly, but third party friendly, meaning that you'll have often different types of users, like contractors, or you may be working with partner organizations to access, your data or your applications, so that becomes a much bigger surface. And the problem is, if you have these different vintages of infrastructure or of applications running, they may have vulnerabilities, based on the time that they were developed, and they may not always be, kept up to speed. Open source is a good example. A lot of organizations have adopted the use of open source, but aren't necessarily doing a great job at keeping up, or knowing that, that as CVEs have come in, keeping up with those and ensuring that those things are up to date, right? So what we do is to really help reduce the burden for IT teams, by streamlining and automating security processes, based, and allowing focus on strategic tasks. So no more do you have to go in and just manually be updating all your endpoints and doing things like that. We can launch all that and manage that and kind of heal the system as part of this speculative product called healing that helps do that, right? And so the tools include things like, these automations, automated tools, so things like, patch management, system upgrades, and integration of new technologies within existing systems. So if we can automate that, then that time to close when there is an issue or there isn't a known vulnerability, we can minimize that time. And that's critical because that's often how, these bad actors get into your systems. In fact, I think back to like Log4j, that goes back several years ago. And I remember when that exploit hit, and I was focused on application security at that time, and customers were saying, hey, this on average, for a critical CVE like that, which is, like drop everything and do it. On average, it was taking them over a week to go patch their critical systems.
Mm.
And that was critical systems. There's a long tail of other systems. And so, the more you can do to close gaps like that and automate that, the better protected you'll be.
Yeah, I could not have agreed more with you that patch management, the speed of recovery is so critical when it comes to cyber. As you said, not about if will be, affected, it's about when in today's environment. So you better be really ready, right? Or prepared and plan and prepared. Um, you know, as exposure management becomes more strategic, what trends do you foresee in risk management in the next few years, and how is Ivanti preparing to support these shifts?
Yeah, so AI is one of these huge trends right now. It will continue to be a giant trend. And there's threats from AI, and there are great ways to utilize AI to help provide protections. For in risk management. So the way we look at it is that we want to leverage it to help simplify the automation and the process, for customers to go and enable these capabilities within their system and infrastructure. Meaning that the easier we can make it for them to go and say do patch management or discover their digital assets or understand kind of the state of these assets without manual workflows or having to have a lot of expertise. that's going to be critical. In fact, what's critical about AI is that it helps relieve, the organization of having to have, that type of expertise, which is very difficult. You can, most organizations, let's say you're a mid-sized company, you can't afford, the deep security expertise to manage your systems. Typically, it's very expensive to do that. So you need to rely on your vendors to provide those necessary insights. AI is a way to provide effectively that way to help better digest that and help build, better robust workflows that align with kind of the workflows that the company is using or the type of infrastructure they're using, and it can move at the pace that they want to do. So we're building more and more AI into our platform that help with that, and we'll continue to do that. Now, obviously, as part of that, AI is a threat because it can emulate human behaviors to the point where they're almost indistinguishable today. So things like phishing or malware, other types of exploits, and all that. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're doing our best to help protect for against those types of things. And again, the best way to do that, or one of the best ways to do that, is to keep systems up to date, make sure you have the posture of these systems, and then if you have vulnerable systems, that you're proactively taking care of it, right? Because AI is just going to continue to be used for good and for evil, right? And so the other aspect of all this is that we're deepening our portfolio to provide more and more, more of that marriage between IT workflow as well as the security teams and their workflows, and automate those within the IT workflows. Today, we provide an ITSM product, IT service management that tends to align with lines of business, like the HR, other types of things. Well, now what we're doing is we want to align that as part of this, and leverage AI is doing this, is to align that also with kind of security workflows and practices, and then use exposure management as that way to visualize and see your posture and understand your risk as part of that. And with that, then that should allow customers to rapidly keep up and achieve kind of their security goals and their business goals as part of that.
Well, that's exciting to hear, Karl. And first of all, kudos to your innovative vision, right? Leveraging AI. And secondly, aligning the IT service, the workflow with security workflow is a huge step forward, especially for exposure management. So I have to ask this last question, Karl. As we celebrating International Women's Month, I'd like to get your perspective on inclusion in tech and cybersecurity.
Yeah, I mean, this is super important. Tech touches every part of our lives today. It's a very different experience than, say, just 20 years ago. And so in order for people to really participate in the digital economy, they have to have an awareness, be part of cybersecurity. And it's one of the reasons I was a founder of a program that we started here in Seattle. It's still going. It was a registered apprenticeship, and it was just what you would expect. It was to get underrepresented minorities, women, veterans, people of color into technical professions through these registered apprenticeships. And we worked with Microsoft and other major companies in the area to do that. And it's been very successful in doing that. And it's kind of a passion of like, hey, let's get people into tech. Now, and again, it's so they can participate within this big tech reckoning that's happening in our world today. Now, within teams themselves, it's really important to have a diverse. Diversity is super important because you need different perspectives on how to solve problems. It's very much the way I tend to think about how to manage technical teams is. You can set priorities top down, but what you're looking for is bottoms up in terms of thinking about how to actually implement something or create, that innovation, right? And people with different perspectives on how to do things, or from different backgrounds or different ways of working, bring that richness to the experience, so that we're able to now, build our products to address kind of the richness of the overall communities that we serve, right? The organizations that we serve. We want to make sure that we're doing that, especially for tools that we build, things like IT service management. All different types of people are touching that and working with that and have different experiences. We want to make sure that we're aligning well to support the different, like I say, user constituencies or user types that are going to be using it. So we get that for having people with these different backgrounds that help us decide better on how to implement things or how to present these to our customers. It's real important. It's also, it just brings richness into the team. Again, having different ways of thinking things helps us, create kind of the right environment for the best ideas floating to the top. And then we go off and implement those. I talk about things like within our teams, like, hey, we have to have this disagree and commit kind of culture that is, hey, you can bring your idea to the table, but at the end of the day, we'll make a decision. We're going to move on, what we think is the best idea. But that comes from having a diverse set of people, and we're not just all sitting there breathing our own exhaust in terms of when we're thinking about how to implement technology, or when we're thinking about innovation or trying to solve customer problems. So I mean, this just helps ensure that our solutions are more effective and, again, reflective of the world that we live in.
That's inspiring leadership. Thank you, Karl. And thank you so much for sharing those valuable insights with us today. As we wrap up this enlightening conversation, let's reflect on the 5 key takeaways from our discussion today. Not only our discussion, but also the state of cybersecurity report today. Number 1, shift to exposure management. Exposure management offers a broader, more contextual view of cybersecurity compared to traditional vulnerability management. And with 81% of exposure, executive boards have cybersecurity expertise and budgets are growing, exposure management is often not prioritized despite its importance. Thank you for sharing the solution Ivanti provides, right? I'm glad to hear not only you have the dashboards, but also analytics insights that offers exposure management to customers. Number 2, breaking down IT and security silos. The disconnect between IT and security teams poses a significant challenge for managing risk. With 55% of organizations have siloed IT and security data, this weakens security and slows down responses. And I'm glad to hear that you mentioned about the patch management, right? Ivanti offers a solution to help speed up the patch management. I learned from the report that companies estimate it could take about 6 years to fully break down these silos without automating the exposure management. Number 3 is the challenges in risk assessment and communication. Organizations struggle with measuring and communicating risk effectively. I sit on a few boards, so I can relate to that challenge. There is no standardized way. However, there's no standard way to really measure risk when it comes to security. Sometimes security metrics don't really align with business strategy. So only 48% of business leaders and 48% of IT professionals feel that security leadership effectively communicates risk. I'm glad Ivanti is aligning your IT workflow with the security workflow, and then also inviting AI into the solution to help really accelerate or enhance the communication risk assessment communication. Number 4 is the impact of technical debt on security. Technical debt is a major security concern, especially for complex infrastructures. 1 in 3 security professionals consider tech debt a significant issue, with 37% infrastructures too complex to maintain basic security practices. I'm glad that Ivanti offers a solution to help provide that visibility into where, right, you may have the vulnerability, and then how you should really bridge the gap, not only for tools, and then there's resource allocation, and then help really mitigate the risk overall, and then especially related to technical debt. Lastly is women in cybersecurity. As we celebrate International Women's Month here, it's critical to recognize the importance of inclusion in the tech industry. Thank you for you to really drive that effort, on a daily basis. As you said, diverse perspectives and experiences are essential for developing comprehensive security strategies and innovative solutions. So I hope we can encourage more women, minorities to enter and advance in cybersecurity roles, and that would help us address the skill set gap in the longer term and really bring some fresh insights to tackle evolving cybersecurity threats. Thank you once again, Karl, for sharing your expertise and insights on transforming cybersecurity with exposure management. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Stay hungry, stay bold, and stay grateful.